The world begins in a quiet, unassuming stillness as the day unfolds. Moments pass in silence, setting a calm tone for what is to come. The atmosphere remains steady and undisturbed. Gentle peace lingers in the air before the first voices break through. Nearby, a warm exchange fills the street as someone asks if the day was enjoyable, met with an enthusiastic response that it was truly the best. The joy of the moment hangs in the air, highlighting the connection between those passing by. The sheer scale of the surroundings draws an exclamation of wonder at how massive everything seems. Brief, reflective pause follows as the bustling world continues to move. Sudden realization settles in, bringing the bitter understanding that amidst the crowd, they are the only ones standing completely alone. As the silence of being alone deepens, the surroundings begin to shift, focusing the attention on the quiet environment. The atmosphere remains still, emphasizing the isolation that had just been realized. Every detail in the space seems to amplify the feeling of standing apart from everyone else. The moment stretches on, allowing the weight of the situation to truly settle in. However, that sense of solitude is suddenly broken by the observation that another person is also standing there alone. The sight of someone else in the same position causes a brief, reflective pause. Under normal circumstances, the choice would have been to simply walk past without a second glance, but this time feels different. Curiosity lingers as the connection to this other solitary figure begins to take hold. A quiet moment passes as the weight of the encounter settles between them. In the silence, the atmosphere shifts with a strange, burgeoning energy. Breaking the stillness, an offering is extended with the assurance that it is still good to use. The gesture hangs in the air, awaiting a reaction from the recipient. Response is an explosion of gratitude, as the other person is praised as an incredibly kind soul, leaving them startled by the sudden intensity. Driven by a desire to repay the favor, the enthusiastic stranger insists on hearing a wish they can fulfill. Confused and questioning the other's sanity, a sense of regret sets in for stepping outside of a normal routine, leading to a plea for release. Shock takes over as the realization of the current predicament becomes undeniable. The mysterious figure reiterates their purpose of granting wishes for the kind-hearted, while the victim realizes with horror that they have never been so completely overpowered before. The situation grows dire as it becomes clear that moving even a single inch is now impossible. Desperation fills the air as a frantic voice pleads for a wish to be made, leaving him to let out a heavy, weary sigh under the mounting pressure. Taking a way out of the deadlock, he asks if making a wish will finally grant him his freedom, to which the voice eagerly agrees, begging to hear his desire. A strange, distorted chant begins to echo, signaling the start of a ritual that hinges entirely on the honesty of his request. When he half-heartedly wishes to win the jackpot, the entity immediately rejects it, sensing the lie and demanding that he reveal what his heart truly craves. Heavy silence settles over the scene as he is forced to confront his own motivations in the stillness. Tension lingers, pressing him to move past superficial greed and find a more meaningful answer. As the mystical chant repeats, he finally confesses a simple domestic dream of having a loving wife and a daughter as cute as a mongoose. With his true heart's desire finally spoken aloud, the atmosphere shifts, leaving the weight of his words to hang in the quiet air. A mysterious voice picks up on that lingering emotion, claiming it can smell the intense longing of a soul that has endured solitude for far too long. The presence expresses a strange sense of luck, feeling a deep connection to a spirit it believes is remarkably similar to its own. The voice continues its eccentric blessing, envisioning a life filled with a wife of pure heart and a beautiful daughter who will look up to her father with love. As the stranger offers a final wish for a joyful and happy life, the intensity of the moment causes a sudden, physical jolt of discomfort. Shock sets in at the sheer absurdity of the encounter, leading to the realization that the self-proclaimed Santa must be completely out of his mind. Despite the confusion, the figure declares that the powers of Santa will grant the wish, promising that every resident of Santa Village is rooting for his success. The eccentric energy of the moment begins to settle, leaving a heavy silence in its wake as the weight of the promise lingers. The scene fades into a quiet stillness, marking the end of a truly bizarre and life-altering exchange. Lingering confusion remains as he questions the strange words of the Santa he encountered, dismissing the man as nothing more than an eccentric stranger. Despite the skepticism, a flicker of desperation led him to make a wish anyway, holding on to a small hope against his better judgment. He pauses for a moment of quiet reflection, the weight of his decision hanging in the air. The atmosphere begins to shift slowly, turning the silence into something more heavy and expectant. As the world around him settles, a sudden and unexpected change in his surroundings catches his attention. His senses sharpen as a peculiar scent wafts through the air, pulling him out of his thoughts. He looks around, searching for the source of the anomaly, as the environment feels increasingly unfamiliar. A sudden biting chill takes hold, leaving him to wonder why the temperature has dropped so drastically and so fast. The biting cold is soon followed by a wave of physical discomfort as a faint groan escapes him. Confusion begins to set in while he tries to process his surroundings in the silent gloom. He takes a moment to steady himself, though the atmosphere remains heavy and uncertain. Hank finally takes hold as he looks around, desperately demanding to know where he has ended up. His eyes dart across the unfamiliar environment, searching for any recognizable landmark. The architecture and atmosphere feel entirely wrong, pulling him further away from the world he knew. A startling realization hits him as he wonders if he has somehow been transported back to the Middle Ages. Suddenly, a series of indecipherable symbols and ancient-looking text appear before him, complicating his situation. Cryptic language continues to manifest, leaving him completely unable to grasp the strange reality of this new world. Frustration deepens as he realizes he cannot understand a single word being spoken around him. Heavy silence follows, leaving him to process the isolation of his situation. He remains still, observing the unfamiliar environment with a growing sense of uncertainty. The atmosphere remains tense as he tries to find his bearings in this silent, confusing space. Letting out a weary breath, he tries to release some of the mounting pressure. Long, tired sigh escapes him as the weight of his exhaustion finally takes hold. His attention shifts toward another person nearby, and he finds himself wondering if they have already passed away. He tries to steel his resolve, reminding himself that those who are still alive have no choice but to keep moving forward. Despite his determination, a quiet sense of guilt washes over him as he whispers an apology to the fallen. As the silence deepens, he finds himself lost in thought, reflecting on the heavy path he has chosen to walk. He begins to wonder if the happiness Santa mentioned is something far different from what he once believed, questioning if his own definition of joy has been wrong this entire time. The uncertainty of his situation lingers, casting a shadow over the road ahead. Feeling trapped within the confines of the carriage, he realizes they are drifting toward an unknown destination with no end in sight. Harsh reality finally sets in as he acknowledges that everyone inside this transport, including himself, is nothing more than a slave. Heavy sigh escapes him as he begins to process the second and most vital piece of information, true reason the soldiers are dragging them through these lands. He watches the cold, mechanical efficiency of their captors, realizing that every movement is part of a calculated trade. A grim routine unfolds before his eyes, stripping away any lingering illusions about their situation. Whenever the soldiers line the captives up, a man resembling a village head appears to inspect the group, carefully picking out only the healthiest individuals from the line. Though it deeply wounds his pride to admit he has been reduced to property, a small, desperate part of him begins to feel a flicker of hope. Considering he is in excellent physical condition, he assumes he will be sold quickly, perhaps finding a way out of this nightmare sooner rather than later. Despite his physical strength, the heavy silence of his surroundings begins to settle in, offering him far too much time to think. It's turned into hours as he remains trapped in the stillness, his mind racing through every possible outcome of his current situation. The bleakness of the environment mirrors the growing uncertainty within him, leaving him to face the reality of his captivity alone. Every passing second without a change in his fate causes his initial confidence to waver, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling. Isolation becomes suffocating, pushing him toward a dark introspection that he cannot seem to escape. As the weight of his circumstances becomes almost unbearable, he begins to wonder if there's even any point in continuing to live such a broken existence. A stern, unidentified voice cuts through his thoughts, demanding to know if the reality of his situation is finally understood. The silence that follows is heavy, amplifying the internal struggle he faces as he tries to process his next move. In his moment of deepest vulnerability, he quietly calls out for his mother and father, searching for comfort that is no longer there. Despair begins to take hold as he questions his own strength, wondering if he even possesses the ability to endure the hardships ahead. Unexpectedly, a bold proclamation breaks the gloom, as someone vows to utilize every bit of their Santa powers to grant his deepest wish. The grand promise of happiness is met with bitter skepticism, as he dismisses the idea of joy with a cynical and frustrated retort. Heavy silence lingers as the weight of his previous words hangs in the air, leaving a moment of quiet reflection. He begins to question if the only way out of this suffering is through death and escape, wondering if his choices have truly led to this dead end. The internal struggle continues in the stillness, as he searches for justification for the path he has taken. The atmosphere grows more tense, mirroring the deepening conflict within his own mind. Suddenly, he catches himself, firmly rejecting those dark thoughts and realizing that death was never the answer he was seeking. Fragmented, distorted thought crosses his mind, adding to the confusion of his shifting perspective. He pauses, the lack of clarity leaving him momentarily suspended in his own uncertainty. The scene fades into a quiet transition, leaving the ultimate resolution of his inner turmoil just out of reach. Following that lingering uncertainty, a heavy silence settles over the surroundings as the atmosphere shifts. Quiet persists, heightening the tension while the world remains still and expectant. Amidst the stillness, a faint and distorted sound breaks through, though its meaning remains obscured. The moment stretches on, allowing the weight of the situation to truly sink in. There's a pause in the action, a brief breath before the internal narrative begins to take shape once more. Everything remains poised on the edge of a new realization. Despite the grim circumstances, a small spark of hope begins to flicker within his mind. He assesses his own physical condition with a pragmatic eye, believing that his strong build will make him a desirable choice and lead to a quick sale. With that calculated thought, he settles into the reality of his current path, waiting to see what comes next. However, that initial spark of hope is quickly extinguished, leaving nothing but a crushing sense of despair in its wake. The silence that follows is heavy, amplifying the internal struggle of a man lost in his own bleak reality. He remains motionless, drifting through the shadows of his circumstances without a clear way forward. As the weight of his situation settles in, the isolation becomes almost unbearable. A haunting question begins to take root, making him wonder if there is any true purpose in continuing to endure such a life. Solemn reflection is suddenly interrupted by a sharp voice, demanding his absolute attention and confirmation. He pauses, the demand hanging in the air as he is forced to pivot from his dark thoughts back to the immediate pressure of the moment. In the quiet of his mind, he reaches out to his father and mother, questioning if he truly has the strength to endure the heavy path ahead. The weight of the situation is compounded by a promise to pour the entirety of Sant's power into making a single wish a reality. But any hope for happiness is quickly met with bitter resentment, as he scoffs at the very idea of finding joy in this mess. His frustration boils over, leading him to curse both this world and the one he left behind in a fit of rage. Agony becomes so unbearable that his thoughts spiral toward the dark hope of escaping the pain through death. However, he catches himself, shaking off those desperate impulses as he tries to regain his footing. As the moment shifts, a new and unfamiliar presence begins to emerge, signaling a change in the air. Atmosphere thickens as the silent transition continues, deepening the sense of mystery surrounding this new arrival. Every detail remains shrouded in a quiet tension, as if the world itself is holding its breath for what comes next. Stillness stretches on, allowing the weight of the moment to settle before the silence is finally broken. An unintelligible murmur escapes, cutting through the void as the first signs of a voice begin to take shape. The sound fading back into the shadows, the surroundings return to a heavy, expectant state. Lingering quiet serves as a final bridge, connecting the fading echoes to the unfolding path ahead. As the silence deepens, the weight of their current situation begins to press in on them both. There's a quiet understanding building between them in the stillness of the room. The atmosphere remains thick with unspoken thoughts as they share this brief moment of calm. Gently, the girl is encouraged to eat more, her companion showing a rare moment of soft concern. She looks down at the food, the simple act of sharing a meal feeling heavier than usual. When she mentions her hunger, she's told that is exactly why she's being given more, but she begins to realize something deeper about their shared struggle. She looks up in surprise, realizing that if she is hungry, then Lizzie must be starving as well. Realization hangs in the air, a shared bond of deprivation finally coming to light. They are both in this together, facing the same harsh reality of their circumstances. A fragile peace is shattered when the village chief arrives, his voice cutting through the door. Without even waiting for the door to open, the chief coldly announces that a new husband has been chosen from the soldiers, and she is expected to return to the mountain with him tomorrow. The finality of the decree leaves a cold chill in the small room. The news feels like a death sentence, arriving much sooner than she ever anticipated. She is ordered to be at the village entrance by daybreak, bearing food for the soldiers as she prepares for her new life. Angst sets in as she wonders how things move so fast the terror of being beaten again by a stranger paralyzes her with fear. Despite the overwhelming urge to flee, she finds herself unable to simply run away. Even though they haven't been together for long, the thought of leaving the child behind is more than she can bear. She cannot bring herself to abandon the girl to a life of loneliness once again. A soft sniffle breaks the silence as the weight of the impossible choice takes its toll. The dam finally breaks, and the room is filled with the sound of heartbroken sobbing. Tears continue to fall as the reality of tomorrow looms over them, leaving only the sound of grief in the air. Uncertainty begins to set in as she wonders what will become of her life now. The thought of reliving her past nightmares fills her with a deep sense of dread. She remains lost in thought, the silence of the room amplifying her inner turmoil. It isn't just her own fate she fears, as she knows the weight of this burden is shared by another. She thinks of the 5-year-old girl, the daughter of the deceased man, who has yet to even be given a name. The bitterness of her past resurfaces as she recalls how her own father sold her for nothing more than a single rabbit skin. Heavy pause settles over her as she reflects on the cruelty that defined her early years. On her very first day at the hut, before she could even unpack her belongings, she was met with violence from the man who was to be her husband. That violence was the only reason for her existence in his home. As the wretched reality finally sank in, she realized that this miserable life was only just beginning. The memory of that realization lingers, casting a long shadow over her current thoughts. She stares into the distance, the emptiness of the cabin reflecting her own isolation. Every corner of the small home serves as a reminder of the life she was forced to endure. The quiet of the present moment contrasts sharply with the chaos of her memories. She takes a moment to breathe, trying to reconcile her past with the uncertainty of the future. The stillness remains unbroken as she prepares to face the truth of what happened next. After that day, the man who went into the mountains never returned, leaving only her and the child alone in the cabin. According to the villagers, he was eaten by wolves at the hunting grounds and would never be come back. Hearing the news of his death brought a momentary wave of relief, yet it was immediately followed by a chilling sense of dread. She's left to contemplate what this newfound freedom truly means for her and the nameless girl. The silence of the moment is broken as life begins to stir around them once more. Quiet anticipation hangs in the air, signaling that their solitude is about to be interrupted. Suddenly, an excited voice cries out, drawing everyone's attention toward the horizon. Carriage is spotted approaching in the distance, a sight that brings a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The arrival of the vehicle brings a sense of gravity to the situation. The world seems to slow down as the distance between them and the carriage closes. Every movement is watched with bated breath, waiting to see what this arrival portends. Sudden realization or shock ripples through those watching, marked by a silent gasp. The tension finally breaks, but it is replaced by a harsh and biting energy. The air is filled with cruel insults, as one person is berated for being perceived as completely incompetent and useless. The verbal assault continues, as the speaker mocks the sudden closeness between two people who have only just met. The bitterness escalates, with the speaker claiming that the mere sight of their interaction is enough to ruin an appetite. The weight of the harsh words lingers, casting a shadow over the group. An uncomfortable pause follows as the gravity of the situation settles in. Despite the verbal cruelty, the focus must shift back to the immediate path ahead. Plans begin to form in the quiet moments that follow the outburst. There's a brief reprieve as they prepare for the next phase of their journey. The group readies themselves, knowing that the peace will not last for long. Greeting marks the arrival of allies, prompting a soft, surprised reaction from those already present. Allies offer to take care of the soldiers, advising the others to head directly back to the safety of the village, a plan that is met with quiet understanding. With the plan set, they agree to depart, ready to put this difficult encounter behind them. Transition begins in silence as the journey toward their new destination starts to unfold. They move steady forward, leaving the past behind as the quiet surroundings settle around them. Heavy atmosphere lingers, marking the weight of the path they have chosen to walk. Suddenly, a harsh voice cuts through the air, ordering someone to leave immediately. A sudden outburst leaves a stinging tension in the wake of the demand. A moment of stillness follows as the impact of the words settles over the scene. A weary groan slips out, reflecting the exhaustion of dealing with such constant hostility. Steeling themselves, they decide it is finally time to begin the task at hand. Unexpected realization strikes, catching them off guard as things take a strange turn. The silence that follows is thick with confusion and growing uncertainty. In utter disbelief, a voice questions the nature of the strange magic manifesting before them. They find themselves wondering what kind of world they have truly stumbled into. Local language sounds foreign and rhythmic, further emphasizing their isolation in the place. They watch closely, trying to parse the meaning behind the unfamiliar sounds. A flicker of curiosity arises as they try to make sense of their surroundings. The environment remains still as the reality of their situation begins to sink in. Preparations are made in silence, readying for the transition to a more permanent shelter. Local instructs them to take the provided items to the hut, promising that the village will sustain them for a time. They are reminded that their new husband is ignorant of the local tongue, and that every bit of help must eventually be repaid. The speaker admits that while the village despised her late husband and only kept him for his skills, this new man is seen in a far different light. Rumors swirl that this newcomer might be a mere commoner, and though his presence is intimidating, word is that his hands are as soft as those of a nobleman. Village whispers suggest these hands have never struck another, and as a mountain keeper, he could provide a good life if he proves capable of his duties. Despite the talk of prosperity, the young woman finds herself indifferent to living well. Her only quiet hope is that the man entering her life is not prone to violence. Peace is her only requirement, desiring nothing more than for the two of them to be left in solitude. A sudden, familiar voice calls out from the other side of the door, demanding it be opened. Silence in the room is heavy as the door begins to yield. She's caught off guard, her breath hitching as the moment of meeting arrives. The visitor announces that he has brought the man she is destined to marry. She repeats the word husband under her breath as the chief orders the man to be brought inside. The man being let in is disoriented, wondering where he has been taken this time. Questions why he is being dragged around in his injured state, while she watches him with growing uncertainty. The physical reality of his presence fills the small space immediately. She is struck by his sheer size, realizing she has never seen anyone quite so large before. He lets out a low, pained sound as he adjusts to his surroundings. The man suddenly recognizes her, remembering her as the woman who had previously given him bread. He is puzzled, wondering why she is trembling so violently in his presence. The chief barks at the man, questioning why he is just standing there motionless. He is roughly urged to move forward, causing a flicker of surprise to cross his face. The tension between the two strangers is palpable as they are forced together. The chief tells him to stop being so stiff, reminding him that he is about to be married, which elicits a startled gasp from her. The final push, the matter is settled right then and there. Atmosphere shifts unexpectedly as observers comment on how naturally the pair stands together, even comparing them to a married couple. The remark catches them off guard, creating a heavy, unreadable tension between everyone present. A sense of realization begins to dawn, accompanied by a growing feeling of disbelief over the situation unfolding before them. The vision of an ideal family takes shape in their minds, featuring a wife with a heart as pure as snow and a lovely daughter who looks up to her father with total devotion. The image of a bride as gentle as a rabbit occupies their thoughts. Following that, they imagine a daughter with the spirit energy of mongoose. Reflecting on these strange developments, they begin to wonder if the encounter with Santa was actually real. Looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings, the confusion only deepens as they question exactly where they have ended up. Frustration boils over as one person is questioned for dragging a sick individual around, but the sight of a new arrival suddenly steals everyone's attention. Brief, silent pause hangs in the air as they take in the presence of the newcomer. The sheer physical size of the man is overwhelming, leaving them stunned by a person of such massive proportions. In the midst of the shock, something else catches their eye, prompting a sudden realization. A woman nearby looks familiar, and they soon recognize her as the kind soul who once shared bread with them. Despite the recognition, something is wrong. She is trembling uncontrollably, raising immediate concern. A moment of hesitation is cut short by a stern command to stop standing around blankly and move toward them. The group falls quiet for a second as they prepare for the next interaction. Awkwardness is brushed aside by a reminder that since they are to be married, there is no reason for such stiff behavior. With that final piece of the puzzle falling into place, the reality of the situation finally clicks. Warm observation that the two of them look like a married couple catches them off guard, sending the atmosphere into a state of stunned confusion as they try to process the implication of the moment. A sense of disbelief begins to take hold, leaving them breathless as the impossible seems to be unfolding right before their eyes. Memories of promise surface, recalling a vow to find a wife with a heart as pure as snow and a daughter who would offer her father nothing but respect. Vision of a gentle, rabbit-like bride and a spirited, mongoose-like daughter lingers in the mind, bridging the gap between an old wish and the current reality. The weight of the realization hangs heavy in the air during a long, silent pause. Everything leads back to a single, staggering thought: the Santa from the stories must have actually been real. Memories of his past desires drift back to him, the dream of a gentle bride and a small, precious daughter. He pauses as the weight of his current reality begins to sink in. The silence around him only amplifies the impossible question currently haunting his mind. He finds himself wondering once more if that Santa from the stories was truly real after all. Yet even if that being intended to grant his wish, he can't help but feel a growing sense of resentment. He questions why granting a simple desire required him to cast into an entirely different world. He wonders if it was truly impossible for him to receive his gift without enduring all this suffering. Bitterness begins to take root as he contemplates the price he has been forced to pay. If he ever crosses paths with that Santa again, he knows exactly what he will do. He is going to kill him. His dark thoughts are interrupted as the environment around him demands his attention. He looks toward those nearby, realizing he is completely out of his element. People around him speak in a strange, incomprehensible tongue that sounds like complete gibberish. It is driving him to the brink of frustration, not being able to understand a single word they say. One of the strangers approaches him, breaking the barrier of his internal monologue. He realizes through their gestures that they are asking to shake hands. He cautiously accepts the gesture, unsure of what to expect from the new culture. Physical contact is immediate and far more intense than he anticipated. He winces as the grip tightens with surprising force. Struggling under the pressure, he wonders if a crushing grip is simply the standard way of greeting people in this world. The sound of heavy breathing fills the air as he tries to find his footing after the intense physical encounter. A sharp, guttural shout erupts nearby, cutting through the silence and demanding his immediate attention. Confusion lingers in the air as more strange, foreign commands are barked his way. He pauses, watching the other man's movements closely to understand the purpose behind this sudden interaction. The stranger continues to speak in that same harsh tongue, gesturing with an intensity that is hard to ignore. More instructions are given, though the words remain a mystery to him as he simply stands his ground. He begins to wonder why this man is handing him something, noting that while the atmosphere is tense, it doesn't feel like a challenge to a fight. He looks down at the object now in his possession, trying to piece together the man's intentions. The stranger points toward the distance, directing his gaze toward a specific target. His eyes narrow as he spots a small rabbit in the brush, questioning if that is really what he is supposed to focus on. Realization dawns on him as he realizes he is being told to learn how to hunt. He takes a steadying breath, accepting the weight of the task ahead of him. The man nearby seems to offer a final bit of encouragement in his strange language. Preparing himself, he looks between the weapon in his hand and the distant prey. The silence of the woods settles around him as he tries to remember any bit of knowledge that might help. Questions if he should shoot now, feeling a wave of anxiety since he has never even held a bow before. Calling scenes of Olympic archery, he remembers hearing that even making an arrow fly straight is incredibly difficult for a beginner. It clouds his mind as he wonders how he is supposed to hit a small rabbit from such a significant distance. Despite his hesitation, he begins to draw back the string, ready to make his first attempt. Sudden tension in the air is palpable, causing a sharp moment of startled confusion as the situation takes an unexpected turn. Before anyone can react, a chaotic blur of movement sweeps through the area, shifting the atmosphere instantly. He's left reeling, unable to comprehend the impossibility of what has just occurred right before his eyes. The whirlwind of activity continues, leaving a trail of disbelief in its wake. His focus narrows on her, as if realizing that everything is about to change because of her presence. Heavy silence follows, punctuated only by the lingering shock of the unfolding events. The weight of the moment hangs in the air, thick with unspoken implications. He makes a bold and definitive claim, announcing to everyone that this woman is his bride. The declaration sells over the group, marking a point of no return for their shared future. As the news sinks in, the surrounding environment feels static, frozen by the gravity of his words. Quiet realization begins to dawn, though the path ahead remains shrouded in uncertainty. The internal pressure builds as he contemplates the second step of this life-altering transition. He pauses, letting the reality of his new commitment anchor him to the present moment. The scene shifts, reflecting a transition in both his surroundings and his internal state. Every detail around him seems to take on a new significance under the light of his recent decision. He takes a breath, steadying himself for the emotional weight that always follows such a major shift. A sense of quiet contemplation takes over as he looks toward what lies ahead. He remains still, lost in his thoughts, as he navigates the complex emotions rising within him. The world outside continues to move, yet for him, time seems to have slowed down. His mind wanders to the concept of family, a word that has always felt incredibly foreign and distant to him. This unfamiliar idea now sits at the forefront of his consciousness, demanding his attention. He considers the possibility of a different life, one where he is no longer standing alone against the world. While it would have been ideal to become a family through more natural means, the trials he has faced since arriving here make the conventional order of things feel secondary. He realizes that in this harsh reality, the way they came together matters far less than the bond they now share. A surge of conflicting emotions washes over him as he thinks of Santa, feeling a deep-seated anger paired with an unexpected sense of gratitude. Despite the frustration, he offers a quiet thanks for the position he now finds himself in. By the following day, any lingering stillness vanishes as life begins to move at a frantic pace. A rapid shift in momentum forces him to stay alert as everything around him accelerates. He watches closely, wondering if those with him are able to keep up with the exhausting rhythm of their journey. His concern grows as he notices the visible struggle on a companion's face, questioning if she is truly all right. It is a frustrating barrier, as the lack of common language prevents him from even offering a simple word of comfort. Silence only reinforces his determination to adapt to this strange world as quickly as possible. He knows that survival and connection depend entirely on his ability to integrate into this new reality. The weight of responsibility shifts his perspective, reminding him that when there is someone to protect, hesitation is a luxury he cannot afford. The urge to shield others must be met with immediate and decisive action. Jun reflects on the need to leap forward, without doubt, the moment he feels the instinct to guard those around him. This internal resolve hardens, anchoring him to his new purpose. He prepares himself for whatever comes next, knowing his path is now tied to the safety of others. The silence of the moment speaks volumes about the commitment he has made. Every step forward is a testament to his growing strength and changing heart. With his resolve set, he continues into the unknown, ready to face the challenges of this new world head-on. Quiet air is suddenly broken by a soft, trembling whimper, revealing the deep vulnerability of the one standing before him. Heavy silence follows as he takes in the sight, realizing just how much fear has taken hold of the situation. Softening his voice, he gently asks for permission to hold them, offering a small comfort and pleading for them not to be afraid. He pauses, waiting for any sign of acceptance, while the tension between them lingers in the stillness. Unexpectedly, a strange and distorted voice mutters something unintelligible, catching him off guard and filling him with sudden confusion. The reaction is immediate and visceral, as a sharp cry of terror escapes, echoing the sheer panic they feel in his presence. He stops in his tracks, realizing that even his simplest movements are being met with overwhelming dread. He reflects on the gravity of the situation, noting how even a neutral expression might be too much, as his mere approach seems to trigger such an intense reaction. With a quiet apology, he asks for a moment of their time, trying to bridge the gap between his intentions and their fear. The atmosphere remains thick with uncertainty as he moves with deliberate care. A sudden jolt of surprise hits, as something unexpected shifts in the dynamic between them. He watches closely, searching for any way to ease the visible distress that fills the room. Silence stretches out once more, a fragile peace maintained only by his stillness. Every breath feels heavy as he waits for the right moment to act without causing further alarm. He remains focused, his gaze fixed on the task of providing some form of reassurance. Despite the hesitation, there is a clear sense of duty in his careful demeanor. Suddenly, an urgent call rings out, a single name that breaks the heavy atmosphere with its sharp clarity. The scene fades into tense quiet, leaving the weight of that call hanging in the air. Following that heavy moment, a new journey begins as the path forward opens up. He urges his companions to hold on tight as they set off. Even with both of them and all their luggage piled onto his back, he's surprised to find that the weight doesn't feel heavy at all. A wave of concern washes over him as he realizes they are far too light for their own good. To fix this, he resolves to quickly master the local language and hunting skills so he can provide them with plenty of meat. Knowing the challenges ahead, he prepares himself for the busy days that are sure to follow. The group continues their trek through the quiet landscape. They move steadily toward their destination, leaving the past behind. Every step takes them deeper into this unfamiliar territory. The vastness of the area emphasizes the isolation of their new life. Finally, the destination comes into view. They pause for a moment to take in the sight of their new surroundings. The reality of their situation begins to truly sink in. It offers a sincere word of thanks to those who showed them the way through the wilderness. With their guides gone, they are now truly on their own. He gestures toward the modest structure, acknowledging that this is where they will be living from now on. Looking at the humble cabin, he suspects it will be even colder than the rooftop room he left behind. A sense of frustration hits him as he admits how much he has always hated the cold, and the thought of enduring it here makes his resentment grow even stronger. The silence of the surroundings offers no comfort as the weight of the situation begins to settle in. A sharp, sudden breath breaks through the quiet, signaling the onset of a deep, underlying distress. The environment remains still, though the internal tension is becoming increasingly palpable. Words fail to emerge at first, leaving only a heavy atmosphere of uncertainty. Voice finally pierces through the gloom, demanding to know the reason for such visible sorrow and why the tears are falling. Question lingers in the air, met with a momentary pause as the gravity of the loss sinks in. The desolation of the scene reflects the internal state of those left behind. Everything feels stripped away, leaving an emptiness that is hard to articulate. Confusion and disbelief flicker across the face of the observer as they try to process the scene. Explanation comes with a bitter sting, revealing that while away in the village, everything they owned was taken. The list of stolen items is exhaustive. From the furniture to essential tools like the bow, arrows, knife, hoe, and hammer, every last bit is gone. Fear sets in with the realization that the cold will only worsen and repairs are now impossible. More terrifyingly, there is no longer any way to defend the others from a beast. Confrontation reaches its peak as someone notes they have finally found where the others were hiding. Discovery brings a new wave of tension to an already desperate situation. Consequences of being found loom large over the remaining group. The face of total loss and newfound vulnerability, the future feels more uncertain than ever before. Even with such uncertainty ahead, a simple reassurance to not worry is offered, leaving the recipient questioning the weight behind those 3 words. Heavy realization sets in about the man, who will be a constant companion from this moment forward. The situation seems dire, as communication is impossible and the man, despite living in the mountains, lacks even the basic skills needed to hunt. Internal doubt grows, questioning if survival is even possible in such a harsh environment with someone so ill-equipped. Quiet moment passes as the reality of their shared struggle hangs in the air. Promise of protection is given, and although anxiety and doubt remain, the sincerity of the gesture begins to take root. Surrounding silence emphasizes the shift in their connection. There's a pause as the weight of their new bond is fully absorbed. Despite every logical reason to be afraid, an unexpected sense of relief washes over the heart. But beneath that relief, a heavy wave of anxiety and conflict begins to take root. It is a confusing paradox, leaving them to wonder why such peace could exist alongside so much uncertainty. The silence of the moment offers a brief window into a past filled with isolation. The world they left behind, loneliness was the only constant after the passing of their parents. Every day back then was a grueling struggle, a desperate endurance test just to survive another day alone. But things are different now. Having a family provides a new reason to stay strong and persevere through any hardship. A silent vow is made to do whatever it takes to provide for this new life and the people in it. A weight of responsibility begins to settle as the surrounding atmosphere shifts. The reality of the situation starts to manifest in the immediate surroundings. There is no turning back from the path that has been chosen. Suddenly, the quiet contemplation is broken by the sound of distress. A voice cries out in a frantic apology, filled with a desperate need for forgiveness. Emotional outburst continues, echoing with a raw and unfiltered pain. Sudden physical and emotional weight becomes impossible to ignore. A woman collapses into their arms, her tears flowing freely as she clings to them. The child weeping by her side, the entire experience feels completely foreign and overwhelming to someone who has always walked alone. The weight of the moment lingers as the silence between them grows. Quiet realization begins to take root, softening the atmosphere. Looking at the vulnerable pair, a new sense of purpose starts to form. A silent vow is made to ensure their future happiness and to never let either of them shed another tear. Despite this inner resolve, the immediate reality remains somewhat awkward. The bridge between them is still fragile and narrow. The physical space between them reflects the emotional distance yet to be covered. A fleeting sense of progress seemed to have vanished into thin air. It felt like they had finally grown closer after leaning on one another in tears, but now it seems they are right back at square one. There's a small relief in noticing they are now merely wary rather than terrified, but the question remains of how to actually begin their life together. Suddenly, an idea strikes, offering a simple place to start. A small gesture is prepared to break the mounting tension. The name Kim Joo-won is spoken clearly, cutting through the heavy silence. Each syllable of Kim Joo-won is repeated slowly, emphasizing the importance of the interaction. Even if communication is difficult, knowing each other's names feels essential for a future lived under the same roof. As the name Kim Joo-won is uttered once more, a soft, tentative response finally breaks through. Following that initial recognition, a firm demand is made for the other person to share their identity. The slight struggle of the name Lizzie is whispered into the air, marking a small but vital moment of connection. The name is repeated, hanging in the silence as the weight of the introduction settles between them. There's a sudden surge of warmth as the name Lizzie is acknowledged with genuine excitement. The interaction turns playful, with a cheerful compliment about how lovely the name Lizzie truly is. The conversation shifts as a reciprocal question is asked, seeking a name in return. Sudden realization settles in, as the atmosphere begins to feel strangely tense and uncertain. Quiet lingers, emphasizing the shift in the room's energy as the focus remains fixed on the unanswered inquiry. Silence is broken by the gentle observation that perhaps the other person has not yet been given a name. The sense of purpose, a promise is made to provide a name and a new sense of identity. Thoughtful pause occurs as the right choice of name is carefully considered. The name Dorothy is finally offered, clear and deliberate. The newly spoken name lingers, waiting to be accepted by its recipient. The moment stretches out, allowing the significance of the gesture to truly take hold. As the name Dorothy is repeated in quiet wonder, it is explained that this name carries the promise of finding many good friends and loved ones in the future. The name Dorothy hangs in the air, marking the beginning of connection she never expected. A quiet moment of reflection follows as she considers the weight of this encounter. She watches him closely, her thoughts drifting toward the mystery of his presence. Everything about him feels unfamiliar, prompting a deeper sense of curiosity. She finds him to be a truly strange man, noting that he is unlike anyone she has met before. Despite having a much larger frame and stronger hands than the dead man she once knew, he chooses to treat her with kindness instead of violence. He's a complete contrast to the people of her past, appearing as if he belongs to an entirely different world. She attempts to process the name Ju Hwan, recognizing that although the language is foreign to her, it carries an undeniable grace. Refined pronunciation and his gentle voice leave a lasting impression on her. She remains silent, absorbing the strange comfort of his aura. Every detail about him reinforces the feeling that he is out of place in this harsh environment. No matter how she analyzes it, she is certain he doesn't belong here among the ruins. She observes him with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. Her gaze lingers on his striking features, searching for clues about his origin. She takes note of his black hair and black eyes, traits that set him apart from the locals. Mystery deepens as rumors surface about a war-torn country that has successfully summoned a hero from another realm. Whispers of the Any Nation celebration reach far and wide. As the impossible has occurred, they have successfully summoned a legendary hero with striking black hair and eyes. The weight of this news lingers, casting a long shadow over the current surroundings. Observations shift to the person nearby, comparing the myths to the reality standing right there. A quiet moment of scrutiny passes as the details of his appearance are carefully weighed. First glance, the resemblance is unsettling, as if the stories might actually be true. However, common sense quickly takes over, reasoning that such a legendary figure would surely be found in a grand palace rather than serving as a simple mountain keeper in a remote village. Besides, the whole thing is likely just a rumor, far removed from this quiet life. Sudden realization breaks through the doubt. On closer inspection, his features don't quite match the legend, his hair and eyes leaning more toward brown than the deep black of the summoned hero. There's a visible sense of relief in discovering he is merely a large man, nothing more than a local presence. But then a sense of confusion follows. It feels strange to experience such relief over a man met only today. Soft physical connection brings a new wave of internal reflection. Silence between them deepens as the interaction continues. In the past, there was only ever one reason for such a gesture. Have a man's hand placed on one's head was a signal of pain, usually a precursor to being struck. The expectation of violence lingers, contrasting sharply with the current gentle reality. Pleasant warmth begins to take over, leaving a desire for the moment to continue even longer. There's a quiet longing for his gentle touch to remain, finding comfort in the simple rhythm of being patted. Silence between them deepens, filled only by the weight of their shared surroundings. The atmosphere remains still, as if time itself has slowed down to mirror the stillness. Every movement is deliberate, maintaining the delicate balance of the current peace. Quiet observation takes place, watching the subtle shifts in the air. Focus shifts slightly, yet the unspoken connection remains the central point of the encounter. The calm persists, allowing for a rare moment of reflection without the need for words. A sense of calm continues to settle over the scene, wrapping around them like a quiet shroud. A subtle shift occurs, breaking the previous flow with a brief, sharp pause. Oft hesitant sounds escape, betraying a flicker of rising emotion or sudden realization. The surrounding space feels heavy once more, as the initial comfort begins to transition into something else. Focused gaze lingers on the details of the moment, searching for a way to react. Stillness is maintained, though the tension beneath the surface is clearly starting to stir. A sudden jolt of surprise breaks through, catching them completely off guard. Everything halts in the wake of the shock, as the reality of the situation finally sinks in. Silence returns, but this time it is charged with a new, frantic energy. Frustration sets in alongside a wave of self-doubt, sparking a worry about how these actions must look to her. The awkwardness of the situation weighs heavily on him, as he realizes that despite their marriage, they are essentially strangers who only met this very day. Since they cannot even speak the same language, he wonders if it might be better to simply carry on as if nothing unusual had happened. Trying to shake off those intrusive thoughts, he shifts his focus back to the task at hand. Looking around at his unfamiliar surroundings, he begins to question exactly how far he has traveled and where he has ended up. The quiet of the environment offers no immediate answers as he scans the area. Determined to finish his chore, he decides to quickly find some water so he can make his way back. He pauses for a moment, listening to the subtle sounds of the wilderness around him. He continues his search, moving deeper into the landscape with a sense of quiet caution. Every step takes him further into the unknown, far from the safety of the camp. The atmosphere shifts suddenly, tension rising as a presence makes itself known. His movements come to a sharp halt when something moves in the shadows nearby. Panic flares within him as he realizes he is staring directly at a wolf. Locked in a moment of pure survival instinct, he freezes, realizing the danger he has stumbled into. His heart skips a beat as he comes face to face with a massive wolf, its presence more terrifying than he could have imagined. Low, menacing rumble vibrates through the air, signaling the beast's readiness to strike. Tension thickens as the predator prepares its next move, locking onto its target. Time seems to slow down while the weight of the situation fully sets in. Every muscle in his body tenses, anticipating a confrontation he isn't prepared for. The environment remains eerily still, amplifying the danger of the wild encounter. He searches for any possible opening or escape, but the pressure is overwhelming. The distance between the hunter and the hunted vanishes in an instant. Chaos erupts as the beast finally makes its move, forcing a desperate reaction. A startled cry escapes his lips as he is caught off guard by the sheer force of the attack. He struggles to maintain his footing, the situation spiraling out of control. The brutal reality of the struggle sets in, leaving no room for error. Frustration and panic boil over as he curses his luck, realizing just how dire things have become. A defiant voice cuts through the chaos, questioning if anyone truly believes he would simply give up and die here. With a fierce burst of willpower, he declares that he is absolutely not ready for his life to end. Tension thickens as the weight of the situation begins to take its physical toll. He pauses for a moment, the silence amplifying the internal struggle he is currently facing. Suddenly, a strange sensation washes over him, affecting his entire body. The feeling intensifies until it feels as though his very being is caught in a searing fire. The agony is overwhelming, forcing him to grapple with a level of pain he has never known. Stunned and disoriented, he struggles to make sense of what is happening to him. His confusion deepens as the environment around him becomes a blur of uncertainty. He holds his breath, waiting for the next shift in this volatile sequence of events. The world seems to stand still as he remains caught in the grip of the mysterious transformation. There's a momentary lull, a heavy quiet before the next storm begins to brew. In the aftermath of the intensity, he is left to face whatever consequences this moment has wrought. He is left gasping for air, his heavy breaths echoing as he tries to steady himself in the sudden silence. As his heart rate slows, he begins to question the strange phenomenon he just experienced. The image remains vivid in his mind. He is certain he saw his own arm catch fire. Confusion sets in as he inspects himself, finding it impossible that there isn't a single burn mark on his clothes. Wild realization begins to take hold, making him wonder if he has somehow manifested actual magic. He considers the possibility that he has stepped into a scenario often found in fiction, where arriving in another world grants incredible powers. He reflects on how common this trope is in the novels he has read. If that logic holds true here, he decides there is only one way to find out. The surge of hope, he shouts out a command for fireball, testing the air for spark. He tries again and again, calling for the flames with increasing desperation. Repeated commands for fireball go unanswered, but he refuses to give up just yet. He shifts his focus, attempting to summon a firestorm or even a simple firewall, searching for any sign of power. From dragging breath to pleading with the spirits of the earth and fire, he tries every incantation he can imagine to awaken the strength within. Silence follows his efforts, leaving him to sit with the weight of his expectations. Despite the lack of flashy spells, he realized the fire wasn't an illusion. As his wounds have miraculously healed, if he can master this, he knows he can finally support his family as a true hunter. If he can truly harness his power, he can provide his family with a better environment, serving them higher quality food and ensuring they finally find happiness. Living in a remote mountain village where doctors are non-existent, the ability to treat his loved ones with magic in an instant would be a life-changing blessing. He pauses to process everything carefully, knowing that once a miracle happens, it is likely to occur again. His thoughts drift to a darker time when his parents passed away, leaving him in the care of his grandfather. Though the old man was quite healthy, he too left this world shortly after in a tragic, unexpected accident. The weight of his past begins to resurface as he recalls the harsh accusations thrown his way. Cruel voices from his past echo in his mind, blaming him for the deaths of his brother and father just because they lived under the same roof. The silence of the forest mirrors the isolation he felt during those painful years. Back when he was only in middle school, his own relatives treated him like a curse, screaming that he was the sole cause of every tragedy that had befallen the family. Shaking off the bitter memories, he focuses back on the reality of the hunt. He considers skinning the prey now, but the lingering scent of blood might attract other dangerous beasts to his location. Deciding it is best to move quickly, he prepares to head home before the darkness of the forest deepens any further. While processing the leather properly will be difficult, he feels confident that he can at least manage the initial skinning himself. He finds it ironic that watching his grandfather slaughter the chickens and rats they raised would become such a vital skill for his survival. Looking down at his work, he feels a pang of longing, wishing his grandfather could have seen the man he is becoming. Despite his determination to grow, practical problem remains: he has no idea how to actually begin training his magic. He pauses, contemplating the path forward as the weight of his goal settles in. The quiet of the moment is soon interrupted by the routine of daily life. He calls out for Bowl and offers a quick word of thanks to Dorothy as she helps him out. Everything seems normal until a sudden, sharp shift in the air catches him off guard. He acknowledges the response, but the atmosphere is rapidly changing. In an instant, the peaceful day is shattered by an unexpected presence. A sense of dread washes over the area as something powerful and unknown emerges. The tension spikes, leaving no time for questions or hesitation. The danger becomes undeniable, looming over them with terrifying speed. Stifled sounds of confusion ripple through the air as the situation spirals out of control. A piercing scream of pure terror rings out, signaling that the threat has finally struck. Ain and panic collide in a chaotic outburst as the source of the danger makes itself known. He cries out Dorothy's name in desperation, fearing for her safety in the midst of the assault. The chaos intensifies, forcing him to react before it is too late. He barks a frantic warning for Dorothy to stay back and get away from the immediate danger. He prepares to face the threat head-on, his mind racing to find a way to protect them. The impact of the struggle is physical and heavy, pushing him to his limits. He lets out a pained grunt as he takes the brunt of the pressure, struggling to hold his ground. A frantic cry for Juin rings out, cutting through the chaos as the panic sets in. Desperation takes over, followed by a sharp refusal to accept what is happening. Juin's name is screamed once more, the weight of the situation growing heavier by the second. Air thickens with a heavy silence, leaving only the tension of the moment. Frantic shouting continues until Juin finally notices Dorothy, his voice trembling as he calls out to her. Shock ripples through the air as the realization of her presence sinks in. A momentary pause follows, with everything hanging in the balance. Between pained breaths, Juin tries to offer comfort, admitting he is hurt but insisting that he will be all right now. He stifles a groan of pain, the physical toll of his injuries becoming harder to hide. He takes a quiet breath to steady himself before speaking again. Juin reassures her that since it was only a bite to the arm, he is fine, pleading with her not to worry. The tension begins to soften as the immediate danger passes. Overwhelmed with relief, the repeated sentiment of being glad to see him safe fills the air. The words are whispered again, a soft anchor in the aftermath of the struggle. Hearing her repeat the same phrase over and over, Juin realizes she is simply expressing how relieved she is. Juin deduces that Dorothy's similar words must mean she was deeply worried about him. Quiet guilt washes over him as he recalls his internal vow to never be the reason they shed tears. Somber atmosphere settles over them as they process the emotional weight of the encounter. The scene fades into a quiet reflection of their shared bond. The crisis averted for now, a lingering sense of protection remains between them. Heavy, weary breath skips him as the immediate tension finally begins to bleed away. The silence of the aftermath settles over the area, marking a brief moment of stillness. He pauses to look over the work before him, reflecting on the grueling task at hand. Exhausted, he notes that while his grandfather made butchering these creatures look effortless, doing it himself is proving to be far more time-consuming than he anticipated. Realizing the difficulty of the process, he decides he will need to find a more efficient method the next time he faces this chore. With the final push of motivation, he resolves to finish the remaining work quickly. Quiet is broken when Juin is suddenly called by name, snapping his attention away from the task. He looks up to see a familiar presence approaching him amidst the remains of his work. As he arrives, her presence cutting through his solitary focus. Recognizing her, he acknowledges her arrival as she moves closer to assist. She stands before him, ready to provide the help he clearly needs. Lizzie gives a clear instruction, directing him to place the meat into the container she has provided. Juin takes a moment to process her request, confirming to himself that she wants him to store the harvest there. He prepares to follow her lead, grateful for the simple guidance. As he moves to comply, he searches his mind for the correct way to express his gratitude in her language. He hesitantly offers his thanks, though the sudden reaction he receives catches him off guard. Air between them shifts instantly, becoming thick with an unexpected tension. Seeing her response, a wave of worry hits him as he wonders if his attempt at being polite was actually a mistake. He stands there in uncertainty, questioning his words as the silence grows between them. A confused sense of gratitude lingers in the air as he struggles to find the right response. The tension holds for a moment longer while he searches for his composure. Finally, he settles on a simple expression of thanks, grounding the conversation once more. The words finally spoken, the weight of the interaction begins to shift into a quiet, steady calm. Stillness is broken by a simple, sincere expression of gratitude that echoes through the room. The unexpected kindness catches her completely off guard, leaving her momentarily speechless. She eventually finds her voice, returning the sentiment as the air between them softens. Hearing those words of thanks feels surreal, as it is something she never once experienced from her own parents or siblings. It strikes her as profound that such a small gesture, like bringing a bottle of water, could earn such genuine recognition. She realizes that being by his side means constantly encountering emotions and moments she has never known before. Her mind drifts back to the way their lips met, marking yet another milestone in this journey of firsts. Although the memory brings a wave of embarrassment, she cannot suppress the growing curiosity blooming within her. Heavy, meaningful silence lingers as she processes the depth of these new sensations. She remains lost in thought, trying to navigate the unfamiliar territory of her own heart. Sensation is overwhelming, her heart flutters uncontrollably, bringing her to the very edge of tears. She takes a moment to steady herself, overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation. It feels backwards to her, as she grew up believing these gentle gestures were roles typically reserved for women. She watches him closely, trying to understand the man standing before her. She is left wondering why he carries himself with such natural grace, acting as if this kindness is simply what he is meant to do. Heavy silence settles over the moment, thick with unspoken thoughts as the weight of the situation sinks in. It begins to rise as John Ho is called out, the sudden realization of potential misunderstanding sending a jolt of anxiety through the air. The atmosphere remains tense and quiet, capturing a fleeting moment of frozen uncertainty. Every heartbeat feels amplified in the stillness, as if time itself has slowed down to observe their next move. Quiet lingers, deepening the sense of anticipation between them. Frustration breaks through as the question is posed why those eyes were closed, demanding an explanation for the sudden retreat. The impact of the question hangs in the air, leaving a void where an answer should be. A silent pause follows, allowing the gravity of the confrontation to fully settle. Self-consciousness takes over at the mortifying thought of appearing as if a kiss on the lips was expected. The shock of the situation ripples outward, leaving everyone momentarily stunned. Determined to avoid any further confusion, a firm internal vow is made to keep eyes wide open this time, ensuring there is no room for error. With that resolution, a focused calm begins to replace the previous flustered energy. The scene shifts slightly as the weight of the upcoming moment becomes the primary focus. Everything else falls away, narrowing the world down to the singular, intense interaction. Soft exclamation escapes as Dorothy is suddenly noticed, her unexpected presence changing the entire dynamic. A wave of dread follows the realization that Dorothy might have witnessed the kiss, making the private moment feel exposed. Implications of her being there sink in, creating a new layer of silent tension. Overwhelmed by the turn of events, a deep sense of embarrassment washes over, leaving a desire to hide from the spotlight. A quiet moment settles over the room as the atmosphere begins to shift. Despite the lingering tension, a sincere expression of gratitude is offered. The silence that follows feels heavy, leaving a sense of uncertainty in the air. Noticing the sudden change in mood, confusion sets in as the reason for the awkwardness remains unclear. Realizing the oversight might be due to a lack of familiarity, quick correction is made by addressing Dorothy by name and thanking her for her help. The conversation drifts into a brief, contemplative pause. Focus shifts toward the surroundings, where the mundane tasks of the day are unfolding. Observation takes over as the scene transitions to the practicalities of their current living situation. Curious sight catches the eye, prompting a deeper look at what is happening nearby. There's a moment of wonder regarding why a hide is being dried inside the house, especially considering the strong scent it must give off. Sudden realization dawns, clarifying the importance of the task at hand. It becomes clear that the wolf's skin is a precious and valuable item for Lizzie, explaining the care being taken with it. The importance of the object justifies the unusual choice of location for its preservation. Watching the process reveals a different side of the person working. The dedication to the craft is evident in every movement. Seeing her so engaged, it appears as though she is truly enjoying herself while she works. The rhythmic nature of the work brings a sense of calm to the environment. Quiet respect grows while observing the intricate details of the preservation. Every step of the process is handled with deliberate care and focus. After understanding how the pickling is done, a mental note is made to watch closely and attempt the task personally when the next opportunity arises. Observing how happy she is to see the fat, he feels a sense of relief for having the foresight to save it just in case it became useful. The moment passes quietly as he reflects on the small but meaningful ways he can contribute to their survival. His thoughts shift toward the future, driven by a desire to master the complexities of wealth, purchasing, and exchanging goods as quickly as possible. Determined not to remain idle, he decides that his period of rest is over and it is time to return to his duties. He begins to move, shaking off the lingering stillness of his break. Silent understanding passes through the air as he prepares for the next task. He notices a look of hesitation from his companion and wonders if she would prefer for him to remain seated and continue resting. They share a quiet look before he decides to speak up. Reassuring her, he explains that he feels perfectly fine now and that the pain has faded after sufficient rest. He promises not to push himself too hard, hoping to ease her worries as he stands up. With a quick nod, he turns his attention to the work laid out before them. He scans the surrounding trees, looking for a place to begin. He spots a tree of manageable size and realizes it would be the perfect subject for some logging practice. While he recalls that oak makes excellent firewood, he realizes he first needs to learn how to identify which tree is actually an oak before he can start cutting. Despite his lack of experience in logging, he feels a surge of confidence in his own physical strength to get the job done. He steadies himself, preparing to put that strength to the test. The forest is quiet as he takes his position, focusing on the task at hand. With a deep breath, he readies his tools to begin the hard work ahead. The silence that follows is heavy, marking a brief moment of stillness before the next movement begins. Quiet observation takes hold as the atmosphere shifts, settling into a calm rhythm. Every movement is deliberate, maintaining the steady pace of the task at hand. Focus remains unbroken, with each passing second bringing more clarity to the situation. As the work continues, there is a sense of quiet determination in the air. Progress is slow but steady, building a foundation for what is to come. With the final adjustment, the immediate pressure begins to ease. Momentary pause allows for brief reflection on the progress made so far. Soft reassurance is offered, insisting that everything is perfectly fine. Sentiment is followed by a gentle expression of gratitude, closing that chapter of the exchange. The interaction settles into a comfortable silence once more. Tension turns back to the surroundings, noting the subtle details of the environment. The flow of the moment remains uninterrupted, guided by a singular purpose. A new sense of awareness begins to dawn, signaling a shift in perspective. Eyes scan the space, searching for something that seems just out of reach. Sudden realization flashes through the mind, sparking a brief moment of confusion. Quiet is broken by a small, nearly imperceptible sound. The reaction is immediate, a sharp intake of breath as something unexpected occurs. Tension lingers for a beat before the focus shifts back to the person nearby. With a sincere heart, Dorothy is thanked for her presence and her help. Atmosphere shifts suddenly as an urgent plea rings out, begging for current actions to stop since no more needs to be done. A quiet moment of reflection follows, allowing the weight of the situation to settle. Just a few days ago, such a sense of contentment felt entirely out of reach, as if this level of joy would never belong in this life. Now, that happiness brings a deep sense of responsibility and a desire to see Lizzie and Dorothy continue to smile. Peaceful surroundings offer a brief sanctuary for these hopeful thoughts. The world continues on quietly around them, undisturbed by the internal shifts of the heart. Every detail of the present moment seems to reinforce the newfound sense of belonging. Stillness carries the weight of silent promises and unspoken bonds. As the day progresses, the focus remains on the simple beauty of their shared path. There's a gentle rhythm to the passing time, marked by a sense of calm assurance. The connection between them grows stronger in these quiet, unhurried intervals. Every glance and movement suggests a deep appreciation for the stability they have found. The path forward looks clear, paved with the warmth of their mutual support. Even without words, the strength of their resolve is palpable in the air. The scene transitions smoothly, highlighting the seamless nature of their interaction. It is a time of healing and looking toward a brighter, more certain future. Lingering peace suggests that the challenges of the past are finally falling away. They stand together, ready to face whatever comes with a unified spirit. The day closes on a note of tranquil determination, anchoring their shared journey. As the morning light breaks, the quiet stillness of the surrounding environment suggests a world caught in a brief, wordless pause. The atmosphere remains heavy with anticipation, though nothing moves to disturb the lingering silence. Every detail of the setting seems frozen in time, heightening the sense that something significant is about to shift. Suddenly, a faint flicker of uncertainty arises, as if a silent question has been posed to the empty air. The moment passes as quickly as it came, leaving only a subtle tension in its wake as the journey continues forward. The atmosphere remains heavy, shifting from the open road to a more intimate and quiet setting. Lingering silence fills the room as the weight of the evening begins to settle in. In the stillness, her thoughts begin to race, reflecting on the new reality of her life. She tries to steady her nerves, reminding herself that she must not be shy, as these are simply the natural duties of a wife. She takes a deep breath, attempting to find a sense of composure despite the internal pressure. The quiet continues to hang in the air, amplifying every small movement. She remains frozen for a moment, caught between her resolve and her hesitation. Ultimately, the feeling is too much to brush aside, as she admits to herself that the embarrassment is still overwhelming. A soft, frustrated sigh escapes her as she struggles to manage her flustered emotions. She looks away, trying to find a distraction from the intense focus on their situation. Her heart skips a beat when the silence is suddenly interrupted, catching her off guard. A calm voice breaks through her panic, suggesting that it is finally time for them to go to sleep. The suggestion brings a slight sense of relief to the high-strung moment. They begin to settle in, the previous tension slowly giving way to a shared exhaustion. Everything falls quiet once more as they find their places in the dark. The night air feels cooler now, wrapping the room in a peaceful stillness. Final glance is exchanged, though much is left unsaid between them. The lingering thoughts of the day slowly fade as the reality of the night takes over. They drift toward rest, leaving the day's complications behind for a few hours. The darkness, the only sound left, is the steady rhythm of their breathing as they finally sleep. As sleep takes hold, a sense of incredible softness surrounds them, providing a rare moment of comfort. The quiet of the room remains undisturbed, drifting into a deeper, wordless stillness. In this heavy silence, the boundaries of the world seem to fade away. There's a desperate hope for them to remain happy until the very moment life ends. It is a reality that wealthy lords and nobles, with their endless rooms and servants, can never truly grasp. In a commoner's home, privacy is a luxury. Every child grows up sharing the exact same small space as their parents. Living so closely, children cannot help but become aware of how a couple spends their nights, or the intimate details of their time together. Harsh memories surface of a voice threatening that if there were more tears, there would be a real reason to cry. The recollection continues with the sound of father falling asleep, leaving only the sound of mother's quiet whimpering until the first light of dawn. Weary heart wonders when the nights will finally become peaceful and free from such pain. The heavy atmosphere of the past begins to lift as the present returns. Transition from memory to reality is slow and flickering. The gentle, rhythmic crackling of firewood eventually pulls them back into consciousness. Waking up in a proper bed brings a wave of confusion, as the last memory was of falling asleep on the hard floor. The warmth of the room settles in, conferring that someone must have moved them while they slept. A state of pure bliss, they marvel at the heaven of resting their head against his arm, using it as a comfortable pillow. The quiet intimacy of the moment lingers as they settle further into the shared space. Everything feels peaceful, a rare pocket of stillness in their world. They remain motionless, savoring the simple closeness of the other person. Gentle calm washes over the room as the morning light begins to shift. Soft, quiet sound escapes them as they start to slowly stir from their sleep. A slight hum of dawning awareness follows, marking the transition from dreams to reality. Suddenly, a wave of intense emotion hits, making their heart feel as though it might actually burst from the sheer pressure. They catch their breath, trying to process the overwhelming feeling tightening in their chest. The weight of the realization keeps them grounded in the silence of the room. They take a moment to steady themselves, focusing on the rhythmic breathing beside them. Low, thoughtful sound vibrates in the air as they contemplate the situation. The atmosphere remains thick with unspoken thoughts and shared warmth. They adjust their positions slightly, careful not to break the delicate peace of the morning. Muffled, sleepy murmur follows, signaling that the other person is also beginning to wake. The world outside seems miles away compared to the quiet reality within these walls. Silence falls once more, though it feels much more charged than it did moments ago. They wait in anticipation, watching the slow rise and fall of their companion's chest. A sense of quiet expectation hangs in the air between them. As the day fully begins, the connection between them feels stronger than ever before. The morning atmosphere is light and gentle as they begin their day together. The husband breaks the silence with a soft inquiry, asking his wife if she managed to sleep well. He pauses, noticing a deep flush spreading across her face, and wondering why she is suddenly so red. He begins to suspect that her shy reaction might be due to the affectionate way he just addressed her. He considers the various terms of endearment he could use, like honey, dear, or wife, realizing the effect his words have on her. Wanting to find the perfect title, he asks what she would prefer to be called, even suggesting the nickname Lizzie. A quiet moment passes between them as she processes the question. With a shy smile, she makes her choice, softly requesting that he continue calling her dear. He tests the word out again, calling her dear once more, which only deepens her silence. Tension in the room is sweet and heavy as she avoids his gaze. He watches her closely, captivated by her bashful demeanor. Finding her reaction incredibly cute, he feels a playful urge to tease her just a little bit more. Leaning in, he calls for her attention again, softly urging her to look at him. She catches her breath, clearly flustered by his persistent and affectionate teasing. She tries to maintain her composure despite the fluttering in her heart. The playful dynamic between them continues to unfold over the morning meal. Daring slightly, she tries to distract herself by focusing on the food, specifically the meat on the table. He finds her attempt to hide her embarrassment behind the meal quite charming. They settle into a comfortable, warm rhythm, enjoying the simple intimacy of their shared breakfast. The peaceful morning air is filled with the sound of Dorothy being called, breaking the quiet of their breakfast. A momentary pause follows, as if the world is waiting for the energy of the day to truly begin. Expectations rise in the silence, building a sense of anticipation for what lies ahead. Stillness lingers for just a second longer before the mood shifts entirely. Suddenly, the atmosphere is charged with a single, enthusiastic focus on finding meat. The excitement is palpable, turning a quiet morning into a spirited quest. Demand for a hearty meal continues to echo, driving the group's motivation forward. The chant for meat intensifies, becoming the primary mission for everyone involved. With their goal clearly set, there is a collective rallying cry to put in the hard work required for a successful hunt. Confidence runs high as the prospect of facing another wolf like the previous one is met with bold readiness. The group prepares to move out, fueled by the memory of their last encounter. There's a sense of security in the air now that a reliable weapon has been brought along for the journey. They step out into the wilds, though the transition into the forest feels unexpectedly different. A sudden flicker of confusion arises as the surrounding environment begins to feel off. The previous excitement is dampened by an unsettling, heavy atmosphere that seems to hang over the area. High spirits fade into a cautious silence as the weight of the surroundings truly sinks in. Despite standing in the center of a vast, open forest, a heavy sense of suffocation begins to take hold. Dread deepens as the mind races, wondering what kind of monstrous beast is waiting to reveal itself this time. Tense stillness settles over the woods, heightening every instinct for survival. Silence is suddenly broken by a flicker of movement, prompting a sharp moment of confusion. Eyes strain against the shadows of the dense trees, searching for the source of the disturbance. The atmosphere thickens, making each breath feel heavier than the last. Step by step, the path forward becomes increasingly uncertain as the pressure mounts. Everything seems to freeze as a figure starts to emerge from the greenery. Uncertainty turns into recognition, leading to a quiet realization of what exactly is standing right there. Traces of a beast appear here, drawing the observer's attention to fresh signs in the ground. The prints are so obvious that they point to a massive animal having passed through this area. After observing that huge mountain dweller for several days, the observer concludes the man does not even properly handle a blade. He doubts that the giant who looks completely ignorant about hunting could have killed such a massive beast. It feels impossible to him. Even a professional hunter would struggle to take down a huge beast alone without a weapon. A quiet moment follows as he studies the prints and the surrounding ground, taking in every detail. He decides he needs to verify the scene for himself and moves closer to confirm what the tracks reveal. He leans in to inspect the marks more closely and immediately recognizes what they suggest from their shape. He identifies the marks as wolf bites, but the wound surfaces are oddly healed over, which puzzles him. He notes that the giant should not be able to move around so perfectly given those injuries, and that contradiction sticks out to him. Faced with the healed wounds and the giant's agility, he considers a new possibility this man might be a mage, perhaps a very rare one. He realizes that mages do exist in this world. He recalls that ordinary folk rarely encounter them. If this man truly is a mage, the possibility changes everything in front of him. He recognizes that the long-awaited opportunity has finally come. A brief pause follows as he processes the chance before him. He wonders what kind of person this man truly is. An older man admits that he is old and stubborn now, but remembers that there was once a time when he too was a vigorous young man. After admitting his age and stubbornness, he remembers his younger days as a forest keeper. At that time, those who managed a noble's mountain or woodland were obligated to spend a set period on the battlefield. Service on the battlefield could bring reward. If a keeper earned military merit there, he could be promoted to one of the Lord's retainers. Not long after, he became the mountain keeper for a nearby village. The mountain he tended was overflowing with abundance. The mountain's only flaw was a shortage of firewood, because even commoners were allowed to enter the Lord's forest. As a result, people had to venture deeper into the mountains to gather wood. He recalls that he viewed those ventures as a good opportunity to learn the terrain better. He remembered that he had seen those ventures as a good opportunity to learn the terrain better. Right before the official contract, he failed to meet the conditions and was rejected. A quiet moment followed as he tried to absorb the blow of rejection. He could not have anticipated what would come next. He discovered that goblins lived within the mountain. The implication of that discovery changed how he viewed the place. He learned that goblins kidnapped human women and bred offspring with them. He sat with the grim detail, letting it sink in. One fact after another fell into place, deepening his concern. He later learned about the village where the women kept dying. That village had become infamous nearby as the Goblin Village. The revelation left the surrounding area marked by fear and suspicion. The revelation left the surrounding area marked by fear and suspicion. He had endured a wretched existence, waiting for the day he could take revenge on the goblins who stole everything from him and cast him into ruin. Despite despising the villagers, he lived alongside them for decades, keeping his presence among them while harboring that hatred. He swore he would survive until he burned every last one of their nests to the ground. Others began to claim that this man could do it. His enormous frame and monstrous strength were unlike anything found locally. On top of that, he possessed an absurd healing ability. People believed he could become stronger than any monster hunter they had ever seen. People believed he could become stronger than any monster hunter they had ever seen. Right now, the goblins are hiding deep within the mountains, but once they run short of women, they will definitely attack the village again. Before that happens, he vows to turn this bastard into an exceptional hunter. He insists the existence of the goblin den must be kept hidden until the contract is signed. Someone calls out the name Aritzkoed. Even while greeting, Aritzkoed keeps his center of gravity shifted backward. He smiles, but he has not lowered his guard at all. From that day forward, he declares he will pass everything he knows onto the other. He tells him he will become a fine hunter. A brief, uncertain pause follows. After the brief, uncertain pause, he exhales and realizes it already feels like morning, as if he only closed his eyes for a moment. A quiet moment follows, the household still in the pale light of morning. The silence continues, giving the impression of time passing without interruption. He thinks back and admits he did not want to tell the visitor to come inside the house. He worries about what will happen when he is not around, and does not want anyone growing accustomed to entering a house where only Lizzie and Dorothy remain. A brief, tense pause lingers as he weighs the thought and keeps his distance. The atmosphere stays taut, words left unsaid between them. Someone comments on an oddly suspicious smile, signaling that the expression has not gone unnoticed. Another voice asks if Juwon has arrived and jokes that the smile resembles an HR manager negotiating a salary, adding a touch of humor to the morning. The morning continues as another voice notes that Juwon seems to be learning polite refusals and decides to keep teaching him, then calls out Juwon's name. Juwon replies to Lizzie, assuring her that he is fine and that he will be back soon. A wife clumsily tries her best to pack a lunchbox, doing her best despite the awkwardness. An onlooker watches her efforts and finds her adorable. Someone suddenly calls out Dorothy's name in surprise. A panicked voice rushes in about the lunchbox, sounding anxious and hurried. The panicked voice from before keeps rushing out, urging haste and insisting they go quickly while reminding them to eat properly. The speaker reflects on how wonderful it is to have a family that looks after them, clearly moved by that care. Someone calls for safe return, and another voice points out that this is probably her way of saying come back safely. The plea to come back safely echoes again, with voices repeating and emphasizing the same urgent wish. A departing voice replies that they will, answering the concern with a simple promise to return safely. Someone suddenly calls Dorothy's name, and she reacts with surprise at being addressed so sharply. The call is repeated loudly and urgently, once more urging Dorothy to come back safely. A voice answers directly, assuring Dorothy that they will return, closing the exchange with a clear promise. After the promise to return, Dorothy erupts in panic, saying she does not want to leave home and that this is very bad. A quiet, tense pause follows as everyone takes in Dorothy's protest. The silence lingers, the mood uneasy as the situation settles. A man watches his suddenly acquired wife and daughter and finds them overwhelmingly adorable. The scene moves forward without words, the group continuing along the path. One person wonders aloud whether they have been walking for a long time. Someone questions what exactly the other is trying to show that would require so much walking. A strange string of characters on the ground catches their eye and sparks immediate surprise. A voice realizes they might have been told to look at the ground and questions whether that is the instruction. All attention shifts downward, tension rising as they prepare to see what the ground is hiding. They lean in closer, silence tightening as every eye fixes on the ground, waiting to reveal whatever is hidden there. The surface of the earth comes into clearer view, and something small but notable begins to draw their attention. A sudden exclamation cuts through the hush, a sharp reaction from someone nearest the spot. People edge forward to inspect the area, heads bent and eyes tracking the marks on the ground. An observer points out that his footprints are strange, and the group narrows its focus to study those unusual prints.
A hooded figure moved through the forest, each step a thunderous beat from a martial arts tale. The young man realized he had to watch and copy the hooded figure to learn. He walked with purpose, clenching his hands into tight fists. The young man watched the hooded figure walk on through the forest. The hooded figure glanced back with a knowing smile. Then he turned and led the young man deeper into the forest. The old man started teaching him all about the mountain. The old man had him touch the trees, explaining that every mountain had its own species. He had him repeatedly trace the land with his hands to learn its terrain. He then used a stick to trace a lesson for him in the dirt. As the young man rested after his training, a hooded figure quietly observed him. With a quiet rustle, the hooded figure reached for the pouch at his waist. He then slipped a small dark object into a hidden fold of his clothes. The hooded figure pointed downwards, exclaiming he had finally found it. Juin was excited to finally eat the lunchbox Lizzie had made for him. With a final click, Juin connected the two pieces of the object. Juin opened the food box, exclaiming that it smelled delicious. Suddenly, a voice shouted at him not to open his lunchbox there. He looked up to see a hooded man pointing down at him. He cried out, startled by the sudden confrontation. He realized the smell of his prepared food stood out too much. Its strong scent would spread through the forest, instantly alerting the animals. He held the meal Lizzie worked so hard on, fearing this would be their last. He felt like he was going to cry. Standing before the wooden house, he remarked that this was where she lived. Then, he noticed a cloaked old man holding a bow with a peculiar shape. He commented that the only bows he knew were curved like a D or a C. He wondered how anyone was supposed to shoot with a bow like that. The hooded figure told the young man to take the bow and follow him. The hooded figure walked away, leaving the young man to wonder if this was even possible. The young man thought it would take incredible strength to pull a bow that enormous. The hooded figure drew back the enormous bowstring with surprising ease. The hooded figure was so steady that it seemed like time itself had stopped. The arrow shot forward with impossible speed. With a deafening crack, the arrow buried itself in a massive tree. An onlooker exclaimed in wonder at the hooded figure's archery. Juin then took the bow himself, aiming carefully as the hooded man observed. The hooded man adjusted his arm, helping Juin draw the bowstring taut. Juin wondered why his target wasn't moving at all. Juin reminded himself to focus as he steadied his aim. He absorbed the words and movements of a true hunter. He resolved to practice hard so he could soon handle things on his own. He wanted to become a man who could provide for his wife and daughter. Then he sang a simple song about the sky and Lizzie's bright hair. The day ended at their quiet home deep within the forest. A young blonde girl kicked her legs happily, thinking of Juwan's black hair and nice, red meat. Lizzie lay back feeling so full, thinking the meat was still growing inside her. A sinister laugh echoed as Dorothy watched Lizzie kneel on the floor in distress. Dorothy thought about how Lizzie laughed so much now, recalling a time when neither of them ever did. Hearing her laugh made Juan feel warm, like sitting by a stove. Lizzie rubbed her full stomach and hoped she could eat again soon. Dorothy then wondered who Juan was, if Lizzie was his wife and also Daddy's wife. Juan carried the sleeping child through the quiet, starry night. She then realized Juan and Lizzie weren't her real parents and questioned what he was to her. Hand in hand, Juan and Lizzie walked into the light. She feared they would also leave her, just like her father had. She worried that as Lizzie's husband, Juan would only take Lizzie. The young blonde girl clenched her fists, her eyes filling with tears. But the pressing question was what would happen to Dorothy. Suddenly Lizzie cried out in startled pain. Then the small blonde girl looked around the room, asking where the other woman had gone. Then a cruel voice called her a useless girl. She stared upward, a terrified sound caught in her throat. He told her that unlike a boy who could work, she was a useless thing who wasted food. Shock and distress twisted her expression. Then the small blonde girl scrambled for the bucket, shouting that the meat had to come first. The small blonde girl confirmed the meat was safe, then wondered where she had gone. Suddenly, an angry voice demanded to know what the small blonde girl was hiding. The small blonde girl cried out, flinching back in terror. Carefully, the small blonde girl pushed open a creaking wooden window. She realized she had seen these people before. She said men used to beat her father, who would then beat her and her stepmother terribly. She worried the girl would be beaten to death just like her mother. The man grabbed the distressed woman's arm, accusing her of stealing their meat. He scoffed at her insistence that her husband hunted the meat, calling it complete nonsense. Juan demanded to know why she was stealing from them after they had found her a husband to survive. The accuser declared they would go inside to check what else she had stolen. Suddenly, an angry shout demanded his silence. One of the men sent Lizzie sprawling to the ground with a scream. Elsewhere, 3 men entered a room and found a small creature waiting on a table. One of the men wondered aloud if the object was a wolf pelt. The blonde man touched the dark-haired figure, declaring they had hit the jackpot. Suddenly, a voice shouted for them to search every corner. Then the armed men and their wolf rushed through the building. Lying on the floor, a blonde-haired girl asked if there was meat too. The blonde-haired girl was struck by the terrifying thought that they had actually hunted. Suddenly, a brown-haired woman sprinted forward with determination. She lunged forward, screaming not to touch that. The brown-haired woman shouted that it was theirs now. 3 men loomed over a woman with long hair, and the blonde-haired man taunted her about how powerless she had once been. A blonde-haired man lashed out at a brown-haired woman's neck, sneering that marriage had made her bold. A blonde-haired character slammed face-first onto the floor, the impact echoing through the tense silence. A brown-haired woman clenched her fist and let out a strained sound, struggling to steady herself as a blonde child stared at her in shock. A young woman with long brown hair stared ahead, silent and tense, as sweat began to bead on her brow. A young woman with long brown hair gasped in shock, unable to hide her fear. A blonde-haired girl stared ahead, her wide eyes glowing with shock. Someone finally admitted they had been pretending not to know the truth all along. A tearful young blonde girl crawled across the floor, trembling as she wondered aloud if she was hated for always hiding and being a bad child. A blonde man sneered down at the brown-haired woman, mocking her by asking if she thought life was worth living now with a different husband. Someone anxiously wondered what would happen if the mountain guardian discovered their actions. Someone with a cautious voice quietly insisted they had nothing to worry about, since the outsider couldn't understand their language as long as they stayed silent. One of the shadowy figures muttered that getting caught would be trouble, and losing the mountain guardian would make things even harder for them. A confident blonde man helped a distressed young woman to her feet, saying they could simply head to the forest. The blonde man seized the distressed woman's wrist and ordered the others to grab their things, grunting as he pulled her away. The blonde-haired man tightened his grip on the woman with long brown hair's wrist and threatened to burn down her cabin if she spoke to her husband. The assertive blonde man led the long-haired woman away, remarking that he hoped nothing unexpected would happen as several onlookers watched them leave. One of the men declared he had come here on a whim and ended up hitting the jackpot. A young man with dark hair pressed his hands to the floor, steadying himself as tension hung heavy in the air. Lizzie sat alone, facing the wall, after someone revealed she was dragged away and feared something terrible would happen to her. A frightened young girl rushed forward, silently fearing that Lizzie might never return. A young blonde girl in a pink dress covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock as she stared toward the glowing light. Lizzie burst into loud, desperate sobs, unable to hold back her fear. Lizzie cried out for Juwon, her voice echoing through the dim alley as she desperately searched for him. Someone shouted for help, their voice echoing urgently through the empty dark corridor. Someone shouted that Lizzie was being taken away as 3 adults and the young girl walked through the sunlit doorway toward the forest. A young man with dark hair trudged wearily through the dense forest, hands bound overhead, and muttered that today seemed never ending. A pair of feet paused in the grass, the tension lingering in the hush that followed. A cloaked older man quietly tapped the shoulder of a young man with dark hair, making him gasp out in surprise. A young man bowed deeply to the hooded figure and quietly expressed his gratitude for everything that had happened today. A dark-haired young man jerked back in shock, calling out in alarm and realizing with disbelief that someone named Dorothy might be in trouble. A dark-haired boy stood in the silent forest, watching the distant cabin with unwavering focus. A young man with dark hair looked up at the night sky, worriedly wondering if something bad had happened to Dorothy at home. Soft footsteps pressed into the grass as a mysterious presence moved quietly through the calm night. A young man with dark hair ran urgently through the woods, thinking he would never forgive himself if Lizzie or Dorothy got hurt. 3 men moved swiftly through the forest, one blonde man carrying an unconscious woman, while the red-haired man followed close behind with a wooden barrel. A young man with dark hair clenched his fist and shouted that he would kill whoever was responsible. A red-haired man holding an unconscious dark-haired man let out a surprised gasp as an unknown attacker struck him hard across the head. A blonde-haired man and a dark-haired man hurled the red-haired man to the ground, leaving him grimacing in pain. A light-haired girl called out anxiously to Juwon. A dark-haired man with a clenched fist strode toward 3 fearful onlookers, one clutching an axe as tension charged the air. Suddenly, a long-haired figure seized a young man with dark hair by the neck, locking him in a tight chokehold. Juwon, a dark-haired young man, slammed his fist into the man in the blue shirt's face. Blood splattered as the man in blue staggered back, groaning in pain while 2 bystanders looked on in shock. A blonde man lunged forward and punched the dark-haired man with full force, their clash crackling with barely contained fury. Still, a dark-haired man rushed forward and tackled the blonde-haired man with raw force. Then, the dark-haired man flipped the blonde man hard onto the ground as he let out a stunned gasp. The dark-haired man pinned the blonde-haired man to the ground and raised his fist, telling himself he couldn't stop now. A dark-haired man slammed his fist into the blonde man's face, while a cold voice insisted that people will never respect you once they've decided you're beneath them. In his mind, a determined and focused thinker told himself he needed to engrave this moment into everyone's memory. Still, the dark-haired man clenched his fist and swore to make sure those enemies never returned. A dark-haired man sprang at the blonde man gripping his sword, while a shocked woman gasped, unable to process what was happening. Someone urgently called Juwon's name as he turned back, his fists glowing with blue energy. A blonde man swung his sickle at Juwon as someone shouted a desperate warning for him to watch out. Then one hand gripped another in a fierce struggle, each trying to overpower the other as tension crackled between them. A dark-haired man tightly gripped his sword, while a blonde man behind him shouted in alarm. A dark-haired boy screamed in agony, the pain crackling through his clenched teeth as a blue aura flickered around the mark on his face. Someone shouted Juwon's name with urgent force, their voice cutting through the chaos. A blonde man wrestled the dark-haired man back, just as a hooded man ordered everyone to stop immediately. The hooded man grabbed the dark-haired young man's arm and firmly told him to calm down as the blonde young man clutched his chest in pain. Still, a hooded elder pointed at the distant cabin and urgently told them to notice how frightened their daughter was. A worried young woman with long brown hair pauses in the forest, silently bracing herself as anxious thoughts flicker across her face. An upset and tearful child gripped the railing and cried out for help. A worried young man with dark hair glances back nervously at a brown-haired woman as tension lingers in the misty forest. A thin column of smoke drifted from the rooftop chimney, curling upward into the quiet morning air above the green field. A worried girl stood in the forest, quietly thinking that the gentle person beside her didn't seem capable of anger. The narrator reflects that she hadn't realized a man could become so furious, and for a moment, his rage reminded her of her late husband. A fearful man with dark hair stared at the bodies on the grass, wondering if he too would be beaten and feeling a surge of dread. A young man with dark hair looked into Juwon's eyes, quietly admitting his fear vanished when he realized those eyes weren't meant to frighten him. A young man with dark hair snapped to attention, shock flickering in his wide, focused eyes. He realized those eyes were desperately trying to protect him. Now the narrator draws sharp attention to Juwon's eyes, signaling a pivotal shift in the moment. A young man with dark hair glanced nervously at a woman with long hair as she insisted she wasn't afraid of him. A young woman with brown hair heard the black-haired man call out her name, Lizzie. Still, the brown-haired woman wondered why her reaction could worry and frighten him so deeply. Still, a young woman clutched her chest, anxiety tightening her expression. Still, the brown-haired woman gripped her laces and wondered why she trembled, realizing he must think she was frightened of him. Still, the dark-haired man lowered his gaze as a woman's voice pleaded with her husband not to look so hurt. A nervous dark-haired man hesitated, wishing he could say he wasn't afraid, but knew their words would never reach each other. Still, the brown-shirted person clutched their chest and stretched out a trembling arm, caught in a wave of physical distress. A young woman with brown hair called out desperately for Juwon. Still, a dark-haired man and a woman in a skirt walked toward each other on the quiet forest path. A dark-haired man stood quietly in the forest, gently holding hands with a long-haired woman as they gazed into each other's eyes. A young woman with brown hair gently held the injured hand of a dark-haired man, realizing with certainty what she felt the moment they touched. A young woman with long brown hair smiled softly, feeling certain she would be safe as long as she stayed by this person's side. A light-haired woman gently took the darker-skinned man's wrist in her hands, her soft smile carrying a sense of reassurance. A tearful young woman squeezed the unseen person's hand and quietly expressed her gratitude.
A young man with dark hair stood frozen among the trees, his breath catching as tension rippled through the forest air. Soft light filtered through the trees as a resilient and caring woman gently caressed a young man with dark hair's hand, whispering her name, Lizzie. Juwon embraced Lizzie tightly in the quiet forest as she softly thanked him for his kindness. Juwon wondered to himself why Lizzie was so grateful as he held her close. Juwon quietly told Lizzie that he was the one who should be grateful as he held her in a gentle embrace. A shocked and startled figure stared wide-eyed, unable to process what they were seeing. A small blonde girl with teary eyes let out a pained sound as she leaned against the wooden surface. Lizzie urgently called out to Juwon and pointed toward something, her voice sharp as she tried to get his attention. Then, Juwon called out Dorothy's name as she ran toward him through the moonlit clearing. Juwon hurried over and asked Dorothy if she was all right. Lizzie gasped in shock, unable to hide her distress. Dorothy trembled alone on the platform, her hands clutched tightly to her chest. A powerful and intimidating fighter slammed his fist into the defenseless man's face, as the narrator admitted that witnessing Juwon's strength up close was terrifying. Juwon kept seeing the bruised, haunted faces of his stepmother and Lizzie in his mind. Dorothy remembered how the thought of looking like her stepmother one day filled her with terror, and she tried desperately not to cry. Juwon decided he needed to apologize to Lizzie right away and admit he was wrong, fearing she might begin to ignore him like his stepmother once did. Juwon apologized to Lizzie for hiding instead of helping and begged her not to leave him alone. Lizzie admitted in a trembling voice that everything was her fault. Lizzie shouted Dorothy's name in alarm, demanding to know what she meant, as she wrapped her arms protectively around the girl. Lizzie, voice trembling, confessed she only pretended not to recognize them earlier because she feared those men might discover their presence. A comforting and supportive woman assured Dorothy she had no reason to feel guilty, insisting softly there was nothing for her to regret. Dorothy, still trembling, heard Lizzie gently reassure her that she was safe now because her new papa would protect her, though Dorothy whispered her real father was gone. Someone asked if Dorothy really understood who Juwon was. Lizzie gently told the young girl that Juwon is both himself and her husband, and she was certain of it. Dorothy looked up, repeating the word, Papa, as she tried to understand that Juwon was now her father. Dorothy, a young girl seeking confirmation about family relationships, asked if the calm woman beside her was really her stepmother. She quietly confirmed it. Dorothy, shocked and wide-eyed, blurted out that if Juwon was her papa now, she refused to accept it. A hopeful and surprised woman with blonde hair called out to the mysterious, distant man standing with his back turned in the forest. Dorothy asked Lizzie if the man was really her papa, and Lizzie gently confirmed that yes, he was. Lizzie gently patted Dorothy's head and explained that Juwon was different from her old father because he protected them instead of hurting them. A determined and aggressive man launched a powerful kick at his opponent's face, wondering if it was only because he was Dorothy's papa or if it was for her request. Lizzie stood on a crate and struggled with the door, while Dorothy watched anxiously from her knees. A young girl with blonde hair cupped her hands around her mouth and urgently shouted for her papa. A huge and imposing figure stood calmly among the trees as someone explained that this was Dorothy's papa, known for his size and strength. Dorothy sprinted through the open doorway, insisting her papa was incredibly strong and always protected both her and Lizzie. Dorothy explained that he never hurt her, but always held her close when they slept together at night. Juwon gently patted Dorothy on the head, and she explained how he smiled at her, shared his food, and even gave her a name. Still, Dorothy beamed as she told them how wonderful it felt that her papa was the one who gave her a name. Then, Juwon whipped his head around, startled by someone suddenly calling out for their papa. A cheerful young girl called out for her papa, her reflection shining vividly in the wide-open eye of someone lost in memory. Moments later, an unidentified character extended their arm outward, making an inviting gesture toward someone just beyond the frame. Juwon knelt down and wrapped his arms around Lizzie as she ran up, shouting excitedly for her papa. Juwon held Dorothy close as she kept shouting words he didn't recognize, but somehow he felt their meaning deep in his chest. Juwon gently embraced the smiling young girl, holding her close as the calm of the forest wrapped around them both. Juwon held Lizzie close under the stars and wondered aloud about a strange smell he suddenly noticed. Then, a young girl seeking safety clung tightly to Juwon as someone quietly admitted that Dorothy had just peed herself. Still, Juwon realized Lizzie looked so radiant and innocent that he almost felt guilty for noticing she needed her clothes changed before she caught a cold. Moments later, Juwon held Lizzie in his arms as Dorothy rushed across the grass toward them. Juwon wrapped his arms around Lizzie and Dorothy, and both of them smiled with pure joy. Lizzie suddenly cried out to Juwon, asking what happened to the meat. Lizzie shouted excitedly about meat and dashed ahead, while Juwon and Dorothy stared after her in surprise. Dorothy rushed across the grass, calling her own name as she spotted 3 unconscious men sprawled in front of her. Still, Lizzie ran across the grass with determination, leaving the 2 unconscious figures behind her. A young blonde girl studies the 2 raw steaks in the bucket, her curiosity sharpening as she leans closer to inspect them. Lizzie strained against the weight as she pushed the large wooden barrel through the darkness outside. Suddenly, Lizzie drops the heavy bucket of raw meat, her eyes wide with shock. Juwon shouted Dorothy's name as he and Lizzie rushed to catch her, seeing her fall with the wooden shield still clutched in her hands. Lizzie strained as she tried to lift the heavy bucket filled with red liquid. Juwon watched in amazement as Lizzie strained to pull the heavy wooden barrel, thinking to himself how incredible her strength was. Juwon watched Lizzie laugh and quietly admitted to himself that her obsession with meat was honestly a little frightening. A small blonde girl stood inside a wooden bucket while adult hands gripped the rim to steady her. Lizzie looked up at Juwon and told him she was amazed. Lizzie gazed up at Juwon with wide, sparkling eyes, and he quietly remarked that being a hero could be as simple as sharing a meal. Lizzie clapped her hands and told Dorothy to bring the meat inside right away. Lizzie pointed to the building entrance and told Dorothy it was safer for her to go inside. Dorothy ran for the doorway, shouting that she wanted meat, while Lizzie and Juwon hurried after her. Juwon leaned on the door frame, let out a long breath, and whispered that he finally felt some relief. Juwon walked forward, passing by wounded and struggling people groaning softly on the grass. Then, Juwon stood still as ominous purple energy surged around him, his serious gaze unflinching in the tense silence. Suddenly, a mysterious and urgent older hooded man rushed straight at Juwon, catching him completely off guard. The old cloaked man warned Juwon sternly, saying he must not beat or kill anyone anymore, and Juwon questioned if he meant not to kill them. Juwon looked down, angry and tense, muttering that getting arrested or enslaved again would be a problem, and cursing those responsible. A young woman with long hair rests her hand on the door, quietly realizing she no longer feels alone. Juwon stood tall under the night sky, telling the two unconscious figures that he would remember their faces perfectly. A chilling voice warned that if their paths crossed again, something far worse than death would be waiting. Moments later, the hooded figure grabbed Juwon's chest as he stared ahead, his expression unwavering in the tense forest clearing. The hooded figure eyed the wooden box and quietly decided to take the essential items, thinking they were necessary for surviving alone in the mountains. Juwon watched warmly as Lizzie sat inside, holding a cheerful Dorothy close. Juwon smiled softly, steadying the wooden crate in his arms as a gentle warmth settled over the quiet room. Juwon knelt beside the sleeping wolf and carefully opened the wooden chest with his hammer, moving quietly in the calm, sunlit space. He gripped the hammer tightly and said he could never bear to lose a family again. Juwon's confident smile lingered, calm and certain in the gentle light. Juwon raised his hand toward Lizzie and Dorothy, inviting them to come closer as they reached out to him with joyful smiles. Juwon quietly promised himself he would protect Lizzie and Dorothy, no matter what dangers lay ahead.